Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're discussing one of the most important and often misunderstood functions in a DevTool company, which is developer relations. At its core, DevRel is about helping developers succeed with your product, earning their trust through education, community, and technical clarity. And now with AI, developer experience is really changing. And it is really interesting to see how DevRel is evolving in this new reality. And to unpack that, I have with me today Marcos Placona, who's a seasoned DevRel leader and the founder of DevRel Bridge, where he works with DevTool companies to design DevRel strategies that drive real outcomes. Marcos, so amazing to have you here
Thank you.
today.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Perfect. Marcos, could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you found your way into developer relations?
Yes, I'm Marcus. I am the founder of a company called DevRel Bridge. I am a software engineer and I've been in tech for, I guess, the best part of 20 years now. And I'm in DevRel for about 12, 13 years. Now, the DevRel path for me was, I guess, almost accidental because I was an engineer who kept on kind of like gravitating towards the community side of things. So I always like to be involved in meetups and go to conferences and creating content as well. Like I've had a blog for as long as I can remember. And I realized that, even though I liked software engineer, like I liked working as a software engineer, I realized that I also liked the whole educational side of it. And the reason I say kind of like came up by accident was I was actually speaking at an event. This was 2013, I think. I'm based in the UK, so I was at a conference called DroidCon London. I was an Android developer back then, and I was speaking. And when I finished my talk, someone came to me and said, "Hey, this is like, it's really cool. Like you're really good on stage and like, your talk really resonated with me. Have you ever thought about developer relations?" And back then I was like, I have no idea what developer relations is. Okay. So I was like, no, because I don't know what it is. And then this person comes to me and goes, "Well, you get to do all the things that you're doing right now, except that you do it as a job." And I'm like, "What do you mean you do it as a job? Like, you get paid to do the thing that I'm doing for free and sometimes spending money on?" And this person goes, "Yes." So I started to kind of like look into it. And then eventually that led me to Twilio, where I led developer relations. So Twilio was, and I think it still is, kind of like the gold standard of developer relations companies. Like a lot of companies kind of like try to emulate the work that Twilio was doing. And I also, for me, I also got to understand like, what does like world-class developer relations looks like. So yeah, that's kind of like how I got into it.
What an interesting story, Marcos. And it's so interesting that this serendipity happened, and just one conversation made you land where you are today. So Marcos, what does DevRel Bridge do today, and why did you decide to start it? Were there any gaps that you saw in the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I when I left Twilio, I had been at Twilio for 7 years, okay, and I had basically worked with every international team at Twilio, because when I joined Twilio, Twilio was only kind of like focused on US markets. And back then, Twilio was like a 200-person company. So I left Twilio 7 years later when Twilio was a 9,000-person company, and it just felt really big for me. Okay, it just felt like it didn't feel like a startup anymore because it wasn't. And then I always kept on going back to like, I really enjoyed when I worked for startups. So I left Twilio, went to work for a company called Circle in the Web3 space. And that was like, it was really interesting, very different, but also it was a space where there was a lot of DevRel things to figure out. So for me, it just felt like a challenge, but also stayed at Circle for 2 years and realized, well, this is also a little too big for me. I really liked working with startups. Now, there was one thing that I kept on doing, which was I kept on doing small kind of like consulting gigs with early stage startups where they were trying to figure out DevRel. And that's where DevRel Bridge was born. So DevRel Bridge is a developer relations consultancy, and we work mainly with developer tool startups, like typically Series A and B, that know that they need to engage with developers, but they haven't actually built that internal muscle.
So DevRel Bridge is your true calling and is born out of the passion that you have for DevRel. So Marcos, building onto that, according to you, what is DevRel and what role does DevRel play inside a DevTool company?
So DevRel for me is the function that helps developers succeed with your product while driving measurable business. And that for me is the big differentiator, because I feel like a lot of DevRel programs, they focus on the function that helps developers succeed, and then they forget about the driving measurable business outcomes. Now, for me, that is the critical bit, okay? Because if you're not doing this bit, then your DevRel team is going to be the next one who will end up being cut when that company decides to kind of like change priorities. DevRel is not necessarily marketing to developers, and it's not just community management. It's not just conferences. To me, DevRel kind of like sits in the intersection of product and marketing and sales as well. Like it's kind of in the middle, okay? And then if I had to describe in a very kind of like simple way, I would say DevRel is about just reducing the time it takes to for a developer to go from I've never heard about your product to I'm actually building something real and I'm gonna tell all my friends about it. That for me is the quick and simple way I like to describe it.
Such a refreshing trait, Marcos, because I agree that a lot of times we hear about the maintaining the relationships with the developers, but the measurable business outcomes part, I don't see that as a conversation with a lot of DevRel. So it's just so refreshing to hear that.
DevRel is right now, it's very different than what it was back in 2013, 2014. And I say this because the DevRel that I did back in 2014 was much more about the vibes than actually delivering those measurable results. So back in the day, we were lucky that we didn't necessarily have to tie the work that we did with new customers coming in because, you didn't have to do much to be different. Whereas like right now, I feel like, just people just don't get as easily impressed as they did before because we live in a different time.
Got it. And that was supposed to be my next question. How have you seen DevRel evolve because of this new reality?
10 years ago, like things were slightly different. Now, AI has changed how developers discover and learn. Okay, again, back in the day, the way developers discovered were through maybe Stack Overflow or maybe a conference. Now no one goes to Stack Overflow. I feel like people are going back to conferences now. There was kind of like the periods of like COVID and post-COVID where like people weren't going to conferences. And I feel like people are going back now. But the reality is like right now, a developer finds a product by asking ChatGPT. So it's down to kind of like the LLMs to make that decision for the developer. And in most cases, that developer will literally just copy that code from the LLM, and therefore that is their product of choice. Now, I feel like there are companies as well as DevRel teams kind of like focusing more on creating content that is more readable by LLMs and everything. So like I feel like a lot of the companies, I saw a comment from Zeno from Resend where, and this is kind of an old one, but he said that he was able to increase a lot of his conversion to Resend by adding an LLMs.txt file into the website because suddenly, his website was now being indexed by LLMs. I don't think it's uncommon to say, as a developer, when I find a new product, I want to be able to onboard on this new product in 5 minutes. Don't tell me I need to fill a form, request an API key, wait for approval, and then talk to someone in sales. So the expectations are higher. Who treated DevRel as a revenue function, who invested in content that converts, who measured activation instead of like just measuring awareness. They're doing really well. Like they're thriving. Now, the teams who are running the 2018, 2019 playbook are probably struggling right now.
Understood. So what I'm understanding is that even in the community, there is this feeling that now DevRel needs to perform in terms of business outcomes as well, because that's where everything is headed. I get your frustration because if you're just a cost center, how do you determine what is the ROI that you are bringing, and then how do you determine what is the investment that will go here and here? So I totally get where you're coming from. But Marcos, I have a question on this. So, right, we were also discussing the possibility of everything moving towards an agent to agent GTM, wherein, as you said, right, that a lot of times now agents are coming and they're evaluating, and it's also possible that the product is becoming it's sort of evolving in a way wherein it can give you all the information which you need to evaluate. As you said, developers don't want to talk to sales, they don't want to wait for permission for an API, that should happen automatically. So in a world wherein even the evaluation is led by an agent and the, from the supply side and the demand side, both are led by agents, how do you see DevRel sort of evolving, and do you feel that how will they sort of make sure that their role is important, and what role would they play in this?
I would say content needs to be way stronger than it was before. But also there's something here, which is agents will never be humans. Okay, so like they will never be able to kind of like just make sure that developers are having a good experience with your products. They will never be able to kind of like create those one-on-one connections. And I feel like the place where DevRel thrives the most are on places that don't necessarily scale. And what I mean by this is when you do a video or you create a blog post, you can get 1,000 or 1,000,000 eyeballs into that content. So like it's a very scalable thing. Whereas when you go and speak at a meetup, you will get 100 people if you're lucky. Like if you're very lucky, if it's a big meetup, you get 100 people. But the reality here is like there is still a component of like, these are the one-on-one and the more like intimate opportunities that you get to talk to a developer, to have a good understanding of like what it is that they care about, what it is that they're looking for. But this is something that an AI agent just won't be able to do. The reality is like, there is this kind of like intimate moments where you speak at a meetup, you talk to a developer, you understand their product or you understand their problem, that an AI just isn't like, it's just not going to be able to emulate. So I still think there's value in the human connection. The value here needs to be very quantifiable.
Got it. Makes sense. Totally understand, Marcos. And while we're on the topic of events and conferences, I think that you also mentioned has been one of the core things in DevRel. And I was also speaking to Kyle Hughes from Draft.dev recently. They did a marketing survey for DevGTM folks, and their findings were that events and conferences are making a comeback. Could be because during the COVID there was a lean period, and now people are sort of coming back to make those human connections. In your experience, is that happening? And then how should a DevTool think about events and conferences in today's world?
Yeah, so the one thing that I like to say is events, they haven't gone away, but the way we approach them has changed, I guess, completely. Okay, so the old model with events was just measure success by how many badges did I scan or how many people did I speak with. Now, that for me is dead. For me, it's about the strategic selection. So you go to events where your target developers actually hang out, okay? This could be, like whatever event that you feel like makes sense in your developers hang out. And then you measure conversion. You don't measure attendance, because I feel like the event organizer should be the one measuring attendance, not you as a DevRel. So you measure conversion. Like, did people from the event actually sign up? Like, did you have something that would actually get people or prompt people to sign up? And then if they signed up, did they make an API call? Can you attribute any kind of like pipeline to it? So DevRel right now is much closer to things like a Salesforce or a HubSpot than DevRel was before. And I feel like one of the biggest one of the biggest mistakes with the kind of like the old school DevRel, which people still do, is like, trying to stay away from the CRMs. And if you stay away, it's like, how are you going to measure impact?
Right.
So I basically tell my clients, like, every event should have a clear conversion goal. Like if you want to sponsor an event, it's going to cost you like $25,000 to sponsor. If you can't track from met at the booth to sign up and activate it, then you have to rethink about like, whether the event is worth the investment.
Understood. And beyond conferences and meetups and community, and we discussed content, what are some of the more effective ways to reach and engage developers today? Are there new avenues, or is this where developers would hang out?
I would say, using documentation as a growth channel. I say this a lot, and it kind of sounds a bit boring. Just your docs are kind of like the highest leverage thing you have. Okay, like if you're a developer tool, it's the highest leverage thing you have, because not only developers live in docs, LLMs also really like docs. Claude or your chat GPT, and you say, hey, I'm evaluating this, and you look at where it goes, like it goes in the docs. Okay, so like when your documentation is excellent, if it has like, clear kind of like quick starts and runnable code samples and everything, that just makes a big difference. And like it's a highly effective way of kind of building community and making sure that you're building a product that people actually want to use. I also like to mention like, technical contents that solves real problems. And these are like real technical contents, not just using your blog for like product announcements. Having real things that are like no fluff, actual tutorials that help developers accomplish something. The last thing that I'll say is like just treating your developer experience as a product. Okay, like making sure that you treat your onboarding flow, your SDKs, and your error messages as a product. Like, run usability tests, measure completion rates. I feel like every company who's like really winning right now, they've been obsessing about this over time. Like they've been obsessing about, making sure that their docs are really good. There's really clear error messages, that their SDKs are spotless. It's much easier now to kind of like maintain an SDK, for example, because you have these SDK generators and everything.
So a lot of avenues, Marcos, from what I understood. You have your events, you have your content, you have your documentation, community, a lot of things that you can do. So if there is a DevTool founder who's just starting DevRel for the first time, what is one starting point that you recommend? And also, when do you think a company should actually start investing in DevRel?
This is an interesting one because obviously I run a DevRel consultancy. So funnily enough, I have a lot of conversations with founders where I tell them like, you're not ready for it. Like you don't need DevRel. I think what I've seen in the past is founders hired DevRel when they weren't ready for it yet. So my kind of like advice to most founders, especially on the seed to Series A, is like don't hire anyone yet. Try your own product as if you've never seen it before, or get someone that you know to try your own product as if you've never seen this before. Go through signups, hit the docs, try to build something basic, and time yourself. If you get stuck, then there's something for you to fix. If it takes you more than 5 minutes, then there's something for you to fix. And then I tell founders 3 things, and I tell them in this order. So the first one is nail your messaging. Okay, so can you explain in one sentence what it is that your product does? And Disha, I'm not kidding here, but like a lot of the founders I speak with, they can't. But also like the other question that I ask is like, why should a developer care? Like sometimes they nail the whole like, what is the product, but they don't necessarily know why a developer should care. So the second thing that I try to make sure founders understand is like, go and fix your quick start. Make sure that developers can go from 0 to I just built something real and it works in 5 minutes. That quick start is kind of like the most important piece of content because it should have runnable code, it should have expected outputs at each step, and it should also have like a clear next action, like what do you want them to do. The third thing that I tell founders to do is like now you just go and publish some content, like just publish some like really high content tutorials on your products that solve real problems. Okay. And then this whole process, like the reality is, especially now with AI, this whole process, like it costs almost nothing. It gives you a good foundation before you start spending time hiring a DevRel. Because what really hurts me to see is when someone hires a DevRel too soon and they expect that person to tell them what to do. So for me, it's much more about like making sure that they have a good, solid foundation to hire a DevRel person. And then when that person comes in, they're basically set up for success.
Understood. Marcos, a couple of follow-up questions here. One is, so do you feel that DevRel, you should invest in DevRel after a certain stage? And is DevRel a necessity for all companies, or do you feel that there are companies who can do without DevRel also? That's my first question. And second is, when you said that, you first ask founders to answer these three questions, explain their product, why developers should care and all. So are you suggesting that for all startups, it should be the founders first who are in the shoes of a DevRel and trying to understand, how that should work, and then get someone to sort of carry that forward?
A lot of the most successful founders I've had the privilege to meet, they've been the first DevRel at their company. So they've been, the first. And I think, when you're in this space where you're building something, you just need to be everything. Like, I have conversations with founders and they say, hey, I think we need DevRel. And I go, I don't actually think you need DevRel. I don't think you ever need DevRel. Like if your product doesn't have any focus on self-service, then DevRel is probably not for you. Because where DevRel thrives the most is at the top of the funnel and sometimes kind of like middle of the funnel. But the reality is like DevRel is not to be confused with someone like a sales engineer. I don't think DevRel is for every company. I think like there's some work that I do with some of my clients, Disha, where I basically work with founders on kind of like making this realization, okay? Like, not 100% of my clients end up hiring DevRel after an engagement. So whenever I work with a client, around the 3-month time is when I kind of like take a step back and start thinking about, is DevRel the right thing for this company? And if DevRel is the right thing for that company, I then make a suggestion to try and get some headcount so we can hire a DevRel. So I help companies hire their DevRel. I help them with like their interview loops and everything, almost as if I were a heads of DevRel at that company. Okay, so I help them out with that. Now there are some companies where on the 3-month mark we say, well, actually DevRel is not for you. Like, we've accomplished many things here. Maybe you need a technical writer. Like maybe you need someone to look after your docs, or maybe you need someone to kind of like focus on your community. There will always be signs. If developers use your product organically, if you're getting enough questions, or if you're like analyzing GitHub questions, if you're analyzing like LLM queries, for example, and people are kind of like, there's some sort of like intent from developers in those, then these are kind of like positive signs that bringing a DevRel would be a force multiplier for.
Sure. So you already laid the groundwork and then that person is taking it forward. Makes sense. Marcos, you also mentioned that you help teams hire their first DevRel. In your experience, what kind of a person makes a good first DevRel hire for a small team?
I would say your first DevRel hire, they probably need to be a bit of a generalist who can both think strategically, but they're also very happy to get their hands dirty. Okay, like an early stage company, for example, you can't really afford to just have a strategist. Like you can't really afford to go hire someone like at my level full time to be your first DevRel, because like, I'm much more of a strategist than someone who actually goes and just does all the executions. But also you can't hire someone who's like just a pure content creator, because you fall into that trap of like, one of them is going to want to create the strategy, but the other one is going to execute, but they don't know what it is that they're executing. Okay, so you need someone who can kind of like do both. The types of profiles that I look for is someone with real engineering background who can write well, and also who enjoys teaching. okay, like someone who enjoys the education side of things. They should be able to build a demo app. They should be able to write a tutorial about this demo app, and then they should be able to also talk about it on stage. And this is why, finding DevRel is really hard, okay? Because you often find someone who's like really good at coding, but hates being on stage, or someone who's really good being on stage, but doesn't really like creating content. So it's a kind of a rare combination. So your first hire is usually going to be hard, but like specifically, I would say, look for someone who has shipped code, not just written about it. And also, if your DevRel person can't answer a technical question on the spot, then they're probably not the right person to kind of like help you out. And also, I feel like this one is really important, which is they need to be comfortable with like ambiguity, especially at an early stage. A DevRel doesn't really have a playbook yet. Like, if they come after me, they'll have a playbook. Like, if they come work for a company that I've been working with, they'll have a playbook. And someone who's like proactive, someone who's resourceful, and someone who's very comfortable operating without like a lot of structure. Like someone who can just go and execute.
Yeah. No, I think enjoying to educate and teach, I think that's such a important aspect. I'm not sure how many people actually take that into consideration when they're hiring a DevRel. So
Yeah.
insight.
And one of the things that I work with some of my clients is when they get to a point where they're ready to hire, we really take a lot of time crafting together a good job description, because you basically want to find someone who's like ticks every single box in that job description. And if it turns out that they don't tick one of those boxes, you need to, as a founder or like as someone who's hiring a DevRel person, you need to understand that, if they don't tick one of those boxes, like what is it that you're kind of like compromising on? Okay. There are certain things that I wouldn't compromise on. Like, I wouldn't compromise on someone being technical. There's a lot of confusion about this where like, people say, oh yeah, I can build things, I go on Lovable and I can prompt stuff. But the reality is, when you get in front of another developer and you need to talk to them, you need to know how to speak their language, because credibility goes a long way. So yeah, you need to kind of like spend a lot of time finding this perfect candidate.
Makes sense because it's such an important function, and if you don't get the person right, it just sort of goes downhill from there. Marcos, coming back again to the very first thing that we discussed, tracking metrics and how that is very important. And you mentioned that eventually everything comes down to revenue. So I had a couple of questions here. One, apart from revenue, is there anything else that you advocate tracking? And secondly, for a company which starts DevRel motion, what is a realistic timeline to actually see some consistent results?
I'll answer your second question first. You need to give it at least 3 months, because a lot of the work that DevRel, your DevRel person is going to be doing, it relies on relationships, and it also relies on what I call the long tail. Okay, so like you need to give it at least 3 months until you start seeing some results. Depending on what it is this person is doing, like it might be quicker. But I always like to tell my clients, like, I don't really do engagements with anyone for less than 3 months, because it feels like we're not necessarily going to get to a point where I can say, here's what we delivered. Okay. Like, some engagements may be like just about deliverables. Like some engagements might be like, I want to build 6 blog posts, for example, in which case, yeah, we can do that. But the reality is, like, if you want to look at the results, then at least 3 months. But it goes from like 3 months to a year, okay? But you can definitely see tangible results within 90 days. Now, for me, there are kind of like 3 layers of metrics that I like to think about. So one of them is the activation metrics. One that I like to use is time to first API call. You can replace API with anything else, okay, depending on like what your product does. But basically time to kind of like the first time they executed your product. And then there's the activation rate, which is like what percentage of signups actually reach a meaningful milestone within your product. Then if you have tutorials, it's going to be something like your tutorial completion rate. But what I like about these is like they directly correlate with your future revenue. Okay. And this is why, again, going back to the 3 months, like, it's not going to be a night and day type thing. You need to give it time, but like all of those things, they actually correlate with your future revenue. Okay. Like someone makes an API call, they're basically now on the clock to like, okay, when are these people going to start kind of like using their credit card here? Okay. And then if a developer makes their real first API call, they're significantly more likely to become a paying customer. Then the next one for me is content and channel metrics. So this could be something like documentation views, for example, like, the views to activation ratio, blog to sign up conversion. But see, like everything that I'm mentioning here is like, I'm not just focusing on views. I'm not just focusing on blogs. I'm focusing on views to activation, blog to sign up, support ticket to activation. So if you're just looking at support tickets, then you're looking at the wrong metric. My blog has 1 million views. So if it doesn't lead to anything, then it's not the wrong metric, but it's probably incomplete. DevRel should be the one creating all of the conditions for sales success.
Such a comprehensive view of how to look at things, Marcos. And of course, we are great proponents of the fact that you should look at data, and unless and until you look at data, you don't know where you're going, where people are dropping off. You don't know what to improve, what
Exactly.
you should do better. So totally aligned on that. So Marcos, before we sort of wrap this up, just one last question. If you had to give one piece of advice to a DevTool founder who's looking at DevRel, what would that be?
I think I said this before, like, don't make the assumption that you need to hire DevRel. You may not need to hire DevRel, but I would say be your product's DevRel first, because if you do that, there's a few things like I've seen companies hiring DevRel where the founder has been kind of like acting as DevRel, and when they hire someone almost like as a force multiplier. And again, eventually that founder's gonna, they're gonna have to step away. But now you have someone who's like really at a good place to be able to continue that work. And maybe the next thing you're gonna do as a founder is like you're gonna find a second headcount for DevRel when you continue kind of like, just increasing this way. But I would say start with like, you go be the DevRel.
Understood. Makes sense. And thank you so much, Marcos. I think this was incredibly valuable, and I can feel the passion that you have for DevRel, and your perspective and insights were just so amazing to hear. And I think
Awesome.
everyone
Yeah.
listening would have like a lot of clarity on how to approach DevRel.
Awesome. Yeah, very happy to be here.